A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed. And that, of course, is the Second Amendment of the Constitution. And today, I'm going to talk to you, well, I'm going to try to convince you that the private ownership of firearms is a good thing. Today there's a very large group of people in the public, just a general sort of feel that's in the air that guns are a bad thing, they should be banned, and how barbaric we Americans are for still owning guns privately in comparison to European countries. But I don't think this is fair to do, and I'll explain to you why. So, I have quite somewhat of a knowledge on this topic of gun control and guns. It's quite interesting, and in addition to my background knowledge, I did some specific research for this speech and found out some statistics and facts to share with you all. So today I'm going to start by talking about how every year guns actually are used in a lot of stopping of crimes. I'm going to talk about how banning guns does not necessarily guarantee that there will be less crime like many people believe. I'm going to talk about who the real instigators of crime in this country are. Gang members, I believe, have to do a lot with that. I'm going to talk about the Second Amendment and why it's important to us today. And I'm going to finally address a very critical issue that I'm sure many of you thought of, which is kind of a secret. So, today, we'll start by saying how guns stop crime. Well, according to AmericanGunFacts.com, 80 times more crimes are stopped and prevented every year with guns than are committed. So 80 times, that's quite a lot. As far as numbers go, on average, every year, there are over 2.5 million self-defense cases with people using guns to defend themselves, as opposed to combined homicides and suicides and such, accidents. The number would be 30,000 on average every year, which seems like a lot, but when you put it in context with how many people save their lives and defend their homes, it's not comparable. And at least 200,000 of those every year on average are women defending themselves from sexual assaults against men. And, obviously they're successful. According to the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy, they said there's a strong correlation between high gun ownership and low crime homicides. So, this doesn't really make sense. You'd think, well, the United States is the highest gun-owning country in the world, so that should put it high up on, there should be murders everywhere. Well, actually, this is not the case. The United States is actually number 103 down on the list of countries with the most homicides. It's pretty low, all things considered. And on that website, a poll was conducted, was reported saying that 3 in 5 criminals would be willing to not attack you if they thought you had a firearm with you or in your house. So this brings me to my second point, that gun bans do not equal less crime. So, anything can be used to kill people. An automobile, we all have those, and those are deadly weapons, but no one says anything about them. We all have kitchen knives. Those are very deadly weapons. No one says anything about those. Pens. Everyone right now has a pen. You can kill someone with a pen. Your hands, even. And I believe that in places, well, I don't believe, there's statistics to back up that people will use anything they can to kill people. It's not the tools, the guns, it's people's motives. So, for example, in the UK, in at least half of all stabbings every year, people use long kitchen knives, the ones we all have at home. And it's actually such a problem in the UK that doctors are actually suggesting that they ban long kitchen knives because they're just used so often in assaults. And because it was in 1997 that the UK actually banned firearms, and it was in that same year that crime rose 77% to 1.2 million a year. Violent crimes, that is. And it's not fair to compare the United States to countries like the UK, where we have such a much larger population, according to nationsonline.com. The United States is the third most populated country in the world with over 300 million people, and the next country down is 70 million less, and then the next country down after that is 50 million less, and it just keeps getting lower. So we have a very diverse population. Expanded to be a few bad people, which brings me to my third point, that gangs are a huge issue, and they are the ones that commit a lot of gun crimes. It's not the people in like the Bible Belt or the countryside that those people that own mostly guns in this country, and they're not the ones committing crimes. It's the people in the large urban centers like Chicago, where, according to frontpagemagazine.com, the murder rate is 16 people for every 100,000, which is quite a lot. And that's actually nothing compared to other places like New Orleans, where it's 73 people dead for every 100,000 on average, which is unacceptable. And people tend to focus in on the fact that they use guns to kill people, not the fact that there's people killing other people, which is the real issue here. There's not enough to be done about that. So, now to my fourth point, that the Second Amendment gives us two very important rights. Now, I'll read it one more time. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to security of a free state, the right of the people to bear and keep arms shall not be infringed. So this basically implies two things. One, that we have the right to defend ourselves from an oppressive government, which I don't know how relevant that is today, but it's sort of symbolic of the fact that we the people are in charge of this country and the government cannot push us around. And that's where we get this, is from the 13 colonies and the British pushing their people around, and we used our guns to fight back against them. And secondly, we have the right to defend ourselves on a personal level. According to finelaw.com, self-defense is a Supreme Court case rule that self-defense is a basic right of free societies dating back to ancient times, because not everyone has time to become like a karate master and defend themselves, using just their hands, like many people would say that's biological. Not some people are crippled, some people just, are not very physically capable, and so they want to own a gun to defend their families and their homes, which I think is perfectly reasonable. Now, I want to talk about the big elephant in the room, what I was talking about earlier. I'm sure the first thing you thought of today when I mentioned the word gun was mass shootings. That seems to be what's on everyone's mind today, or not today, but in general. And I don't believe it's fair to penalize the people that are the good citizens owning guns, just wanting to do what's right, because of people that misuse them to commit, terrible acts of violence, which is very tragic. But I think that people often forget that these mass shootings don't happen nearly as often as, they're led to believe by the media. And again, it's usually either someone who's mentally ill. It's always someone who's mentally ill that does these mass shootings. And we need to upgrade our mental health system, because that's the real issue here. And it's also according to AmericanGunFacts.com that all but one of the mass shootings reported in the last 50 years have taken place in gun-free zones. So I think this is sort of interesting that in places where people said, we don't want guns because we're scared of violence, it's in those places that they're all sitting ducks, for violent criminals that will get a hold of guns even if there's a ban. So I just want to say that in conclusion, I told you about how guns stop crime every year, how a gun ban doesn't guarantee there'll be less crime, and I talked about the gang problem and how important the Second Amendment is to us. And I just want to say that, the Second Amendment is very important. The right to bear arms is sort of unique to the United States almost. And once, the right to defend yourself goes away in like some sort of re-amendment, it will never come back. And I just hope that all of you keep that in mind. And, thank you.
All right, Crystal Lynn, what did you think?
Well, I really liked his speech. I didn't really find anything he said wrong with it. The only thing maybe your tone was kind of the same throughout the whole speech. But I really liked your introduction because you explained what you were going to talk about, all your points, and you have clear between your transitions, and I never felt like lost or anything. I knew like what you were going to talk about next, and you had really good eye contact, and you also cited your sources really well.
Yeah, I think the secondary points need to be stated in more declarative ways. Sometimes you kind of lead in with a question, or you've got kind of a convoluted argument, and you need something that's a little bit more straightforward, because eventually you get to the point that you're making, but I think you'd come across more forcefully, and it would be a little bit easier to follow if some of those main ideas weren't, they sounded less like transitions and more like claims. I'd agree with most of the assessments that she just gave you. I did think your voice was fine. I thought your eye contact was occasionally intermittent. You have a tendency to kind of look down still. I mean, you do look up at us pretty regularly, but your go-to default position is kind of down and away from us instead of at the audience that you're talking to. I think I'd spend a little bit more time, especially on that early statistic where you say there are 80 times more crimes prevented than are committed with guns. That's a pretty strong statistical statement. I think we need more information on that. How is that arrived at? What's the basis of this? Because that's kind of a key point in your argument. And I didn't think it was cited as completely as it could be. It sounded like you're summarizing some statistical information instead of explaining it or even quoting it directly. And I think that reduces its effectiveness a little bit. All right, we'll stop there.